Hello and welcome to Spread Book Joy. Today I'm going to be doing the last 10 books tag. If you're new to the channel, I'm Jack. I'm a qualified primary school teacher who recommends great books for children for home or school, and also just talks about my reading and spread the joy of books and reading as far and wide as possible. So today I'm going to be doing the last 10 books tag. So this is apparently a tag that was created by Mark Nash, and I'll link the original video in my description box below, but I've seen lots of my favourite booktubers doing this tag and I thought it sounded like fun, so I'll give it a go. First question is, what is the last book that you didn't finish? And I think the last book that I didn't finish was Ready Player 2, which I've spoken about briefly. I think that was the last book that I DNF'd. Yeah, just really not enjoyable. I was really disappointed because I loved book 1 and I got it on audiobook because I love the audiobook of Ready Player 1, read by Will Wheaton, which is brilliant. But yeah, even that couldn't really save it for me. What's the last book you reread? The last book I reread, I'm currently rereading Jingo by Terry Pratchett, because I took part in a whole Terry Pratchett in April event on Instagram. I love the Discworld and I reread them a lot. They're probably my most reread books. Oh, actually, so I'm currently rereading that one as we film this. The last book that I reread and finished was The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley. I was listening to it on audio because in the night I can't sleep. I like to wake up and I like to listen to audiobooks as I'm falling asleep. I don't want to miss anything and I'll invariably fall asleep and miss tons. So I always listen to something like a comfort reread or listen. So I started on The Mist of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley, but I was enjoying it so much that I started reading the actual book and I couldn't put it down. I haven't reread the book for a few years now. I've reread it tons. I first read it when I was like 13. It's one of my favourite books. And it's interesting, I might do a video on it actually because I had a lot of thoughts while I was rereading it this time. But yeah, that was the last book I reread. So the next question is, what was the last book you bought? I've been trying to think about this, and I think the last physical book that I bought, it might have been book 2 of the Chronicles of Amber. I started reading the Roger Zelazny 9 Princes in Amber was the first book, and I bought book 2 second-hand copy of that. The last book that I just bought but I haven't received yet, there's an amazing second-hand fantasy bookshop online called The Inquisitive Goblin. I've become friends with them on Bookstagram and I absolutely love them. I love old fantasy and sci-fi books, second-hand books, and I like the pre-loved book, and particularly the old covers for sci-fi and fantasy, and older fantasy from the 80s and 90s particularly. New fantasy, I love fantasy, it's my favourite genre, but there's something about those books that is really nostalgic for me. Reminds me of my childhood, also reminds me of when I was a bookseller a long time ago. So if you like fantasy books, do check out The Inquisitive Goblin. I'll put a link in the description box below. Brilliant books. But I literally just bought the entire Belgariad by David Eddings, which is a 5-book series and epic, high fantasy, and I bought all 5 books for like £12.50, something like that, because the Inquisitive Goblin puts up their latest stock on Instagram, and they don't have many followers on Instagram at the moment, so they should have more, so please do go and follow them if you like fantasy books and you're in the UK. And yeah, most books are about £2.50, and yeah, that's the last thing that I remember buying prior to this video starting. Haven't got them yet. I'd love to. I might do an unhaul. I might do a haul video when my turn up because I bought a few other things off of them as well. The last book you said you read but didn't. I don't know. I don't pretend to read books. I know lots of people do. I know it's one of those things where it's like, oh, I've read War and Peace or whatever. I don't do that. So, last book I said I read but didn't. No, don't have one. What was the last book you wrote in the margins of? And it was a book I was reviewing and I had a proof copy, and it was by Ash Oakenthorne, which I did a video review of, and I can put it's a middle grade book, really very, very sweet. But I started putting pencil notes in the margin. I want to do that more with my books. I've got a real thing about writing in my books. I love my old A-level books where I've got text like Wuthering Heights, where I've got loads of writing in them and my thoughts on them, which I absolutely adore. But since I stopped university and since I stopped studying books, I don't write in them, and I've got a real kind of problem with it, but I want to do it. I want to do more underlining. There are two amazing bookstagrammers, Anna the Books I Read and Sissy Reads, absolutely wonderful book reviewers. They read lots of classics and they've inspired me to try annotating, because they read things like War and Peace or Les Mis, and they've got these beautifully annotated and tabbed books with all their thoughts, and it means that when they're reading, they're really actively reading and reading deeply and taking a lot more away from it. And I was like, yes, my reading is so surface and shallow in comparison, so I really want to get into annotating books, and I'll link their accounts below, because particularly Sissy Reads has a video on how she annotates, and I've never wanted to read Russian literature as much. I've always kind of shied away from it. It's quite difficult, but they're wonderful, and I really highly recommend following them. Their insights and the way they read is just so inspiring. I love them. What's the last book you had signed? And I think, so aside from ones I've ordered, where I've ordered signed copies, the most recent ordered signed copy I got was the Gilded Ones by Namina Fauna. I also have a signed copy of Matt Haig's book, The Midnight Library. I ordered that during lockdown. But one that I had signed for me and I was actually present for was the amazing Chris Riddell, who is British author illustrator, and he signed his new book at the time, which was the Goth Girl book, which is a middle grade series. But I also bought a copy of Fortunately the Milk, which is his book with Neil Gaiman, another great middle grade book. And he was so lovely. He did this amazing talk and illustrated while he was talking at a local venue close to me where I live in Walthamstow. And he was wonderful. And it's the first time I've sort of talked to an author and not been a bit intimidated and frightened, because he just put me right at my ease. He was absolutely lovely. Chris Riddell, love him. Brilliant. What was the last book you lost? The last book I lost, oh gosh. I get really upset if I lose books, so this should stand out for me. I can't remember the last book I lost, but I remember the last book I thought I'd lost, and I nearly cried my eyes out. I did cry a little bit actually. So when Terry Pratchett died, I went looking for, I've had a signed copy of a Terry Pratchett book since I was a bookseller, and when he died, I went to my shelves to look for that book and I couldn't see it anywhere, and absolutely tore the house apart looking for it, worrying, thinking maybe when we last moved house I didn't pack it, what's gone on, maybe I've lent it to someone. I spent 5 years looking for this book, and I didn't quite give up on it, thinking maybe I've lent it to a friend who has it. Another friend of mine had moved out of London, had lots of books in her basement, maybe they're in there. And then I went round to my brother's this time last year, and he'd found a box of my books in his cupboard, which I must have asked him to store there about 10 years ago. And guess what was inside it? So it's not a story about a book that I lost, but it's the last book I remember losing that meant anything to me, but it came back to me, and it was just so perfect. It was just at the start of the pandemic and things were a bit hectic in my personal life at the time. And it was Terry Pratchett's book, The Last Continent, which is his Discworld sort of parody, or homage, I should say, to Australian culture. And he had written in it, "To Jackie, no worries," Terry Pratchett. And it kind of felt like this message from him at that time, no worries. So yeah, it's my little story about my lost book, but it did come back to me. What was the last book you had to replace? Oh my gosh. I tell you what it was. It's The Colour of Magic. And I had to get a Josh Kirby original cover because I couldn't find it anywhere. And I was taking part in Pratchett in April. And then I remembered that I'd lent The Colour of Magic to a friend of mine who's moved out of the country now. And she still has it, and I'm sure she'll send it to me, or I get it to her. For the next time I'm allowed to travel, I'll go and get that from her. But I needed a copy for Pratchett in April, so I had to get an online secondhand copy. So that was the last book that I replaced. The last book you had an argument over? I don't like to argue about books. I like to have a discussion about books. So I really find it difficult when I see people online arguing over books or getting upset over people's viewpoints on books. If someone doesn't like a book that I loved, sometimes, yeah, you do feel like, oh, I love that book. However, let's have a talk about it. Why didn't you like it? What did you like? What didn't you like? I find it hard, as someone who's a bit of a people pleaser, to tell people when I didn't like something that they liked. But also, I don't like to talk about what I didn't like about a book. Sometimes I'm trying to change my language around it, let's put it that way, because I recognise that even if a book is something that I really couldn't get on with, that's someone's work and they've put a lot of effort into it. And so I like to talk about if something didn't work for me or something I didn't enjoy. I mean, it's all right to talk about something you didn't enjoy, but there are always aspects of something that, you know, there are always lots that's gone into a piece of work, and I would never ever tag an author in a review that isn't favourable, because how horrible is that? But I would never do a really unfavourable review. I'll say if a book didn't work for me, but I'm not going to. There's a lot of books that I'll put in my TBRs, and you'll see them if I ever do TBR shots. Sometimes you won't see a review for that book, and that's because it wasn't for me necessarily, and actually it's not a book that I'm going to recommend for people. And I put this channel together and my Bookstagram together primarily to recommend good books. So that's kind of been my mission on this channel. But the channel's evolved a little bit recently because I do like to talk about my own reading, and sometimes things just don't work for me, in which case I will talk about them, but I'm never going to use really derogatory language or argue with someone over a book. That's just not for me. What's the last book you couldn't get hold of? It was Roger Zelazny's 9 Princes in Amber, which I did get a copy of because my brother sent it to me. He found a second-hand copy online, and I've since found a few second-hand copies of the other books. But that was the last book. And actually, the Inquisitive Goblin, who I talked about, they just posted they got a copy of 9 Princes in Amber, which is so funny. This book's just coming at me from like all angles now. I can find copies of it everywhere. But that was the last book I really struggled to get hold of. But other than that, struggling to get hold of books these days, the Gilded Ones, I did want to get that in audio. There's no audio for it, and I found that really, really surprising because it's not exactly a small publisher. I think it's Usborne Books, and it's a book with a lot of buzz, so I was quite surprised it didn't have an audio. So that was one of the last things I really struggled to get hold of. So that was the tag. I wasn't tagged by anyone. I'm going to attempt to tag people because I really want to start taking part in the community, and I try and keep up with people's videos. Sometimes I have to binge watch videos because otherwise I just don't get time for reading. So I set aside time and binge watch videos, listen to them in the background as well. So I'm going to tag Julie from The Hungry Bookworm. Hi Julie. And I'm going to tag Misa from Books and Sushi. They're both brilliant channels. They're really lovely people. So I would definitely go and watch them. And yeah, I think that's all I'm going to tag for now. I am tempted to tag someone else, but I think I'll just try those 2 people and see how we go. And hopefully, if you haven't done that, tag those 2 people, Misa and Julie. You'll enjoy doing it. I thought it was a lot of fun. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe. I post review videos on a Wednesday and videos like tags and other content on Saturdays. So hopefully I'll see you again here soon. Bye.